There's an evolution in the sports landscape around how do you talk to, engage with, and eventually monetize and commercialize that next generation of fans. And that's a challenge for really anybody who touches a sports ecosystem and landscape is trying to figure that out.
All right, we are back for another episode of Under the Number. Today, I'm joined by Brian Kopp. Brian is a partner at Riddell Sports Ventures. Brian, thanks so much for jumping on today.
Thanks, Brent. Good to see you.
So I want to kick it off right off the top. The Riddell family is behind the biggest stadium project in the history of college sports with what is coming very soon to Northwestern. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so the new Ryan Field, they did an analysis where they were looking at how to improve the old stadium, which was almost 100 years old. And they decided rather than trying to, make it work with something that was outdated, let's start from scratch. So they tore the old stadium down, building a brand new one from the ground up. And really the focus is on technology and accessibility and really improving everything about the experience. So they're actually going smaller, which is very unique in the college football space, where a lot of other places are trying to go bigger. And what they do is because they're bowls, they just have to keep going out. Whereas here they could build it from the beginning and make it very tight. The sight lines are amazing. I just had a walk through a few weeks ago. It sounds amazing. It's going to be even more spectacular than anybody can imagine.
What is the expected opening date? I saw the renderings. I was looking at them again this morning. It looks incredible. I mean, it's like there is no college facility anywhere that I think holds a candle to what that thing's going to look like.
Yeah, no, it's going to be phenomenal. It'll be ready in the fall of 26. I don't think they've quite announced which game it'll be. I think they're still trying to figure out the schedule and when they'll open it, but it'll be in the fall of 2026, which would be great. And in the meantime, they played at a lakefront kind of pop-up stadium. I went to a couple games there. It was a great experience too. So it's Northwestern's had a fun couple years, but the next stage of this with the new Ryan Field is going to be phenomenal.
So I saw that the Ryan family gave a very historic gift to Northwestern to the tune of like $500 million just a couple years ago. And obviously the Ryan Field is coming out of that. What is if you can go back in time and explain the obsession or the intrigue of sports and what sports mean to the Ryan family, which is obviously an iconic Chicago and American family with stakes in the Chicago Bears and plenty of other franchises.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think with Northwestern, it's a combination of sport, but also the university itself. So Pat Ryan Sr. and Shirley Ryan, his wife, met at Northwestern. So they have a very strong connection to the school. Their son, Pat Ryan Jr. and my partner, Rob Ryan, both went to graduate school at Northwestern. So they've had a very strong support of the school, not just the athletics, but the academic side of the school as well. I think on the sports side, the Ryan family's always been a believer and a supporter in sports. As you mentioned, longtime holders of the Chicago investors in the Chicago Bears, a longtime investor in Penske. I know Pat Ryan Sr. and Roger Penske met decades ago, and they were very involved in that business. And more recently, looking at things in the sports tech and emerging sports side. So that's really where Ryan Sports Ventures came to be, because the family wanted to look to do more direct investing in the sports space. And that's when we formed our group about 3.5 years ago.
So talk a little bit about how Ryan Sports Ventures is different from a typical venture fund.
Yeah, so we are an extension of the Ryan family. So the Ryans the Ryan family are our only LPs. And so we invest in a number of things, primarily earlier stage sports tech companies. So kind of seed Series A, typically writing $1 million to $2 million checks. We also look at media and content deals. We have a couple in that space, and then sports properties. And on the sports property side, the family already has their stake in the Bears. We're really not looking for the traditional sports leagues, but really emerging sports and leagues and properties. Our largest investment is in AFC Bournemouth in the English Premier League, which is not an emerging league or emerging property, given they've been around since 1899, but really one that typically hasn't been in the top tier, that really is hitting above their weight and using data and technology and different ways to overachieve. We're right now sitting in 9th. Earlier this season, we were sitting solidly in 2nd place. So they've been doing really well. So most of what we look at is on the property side is the emerging sports and leagues. And so I think that's where the family's interest is in how to leverage data and technology to make the right investments, to improve the sport, to improve accessibility, and ultimately get a good financial return.
So you've got a sports tech background. I know you spent time as president of North America for Catapult, which is a leading sports tech company now. Tell me how that your personal career path evolved to end up with you sitting where you do as partner at Ryan Sports Ventures now.
So I started my career in finance. So I did investment banking and private equity, went to Northwestern for graduate school, went to Kellogg. And after that, I wanted to get some operating experience because I liked the finance investing side, but I also knew that I would be more effective if I had experience as an operator. And so got into a couple of different industries, but really didn't get into sports until I was 32 years old, and joined STATS, which is now STATS Perform. And they were looking for new ways to grow the business and grow their data as a sports data company. They were doing it what I call the analog way. People literally watching sports venues on TV and categorizing statistics. And they had built a great business doing that. And they were looking for different ways to expand and use technology. And so one of the first things we did was acquire a company called SportVU out of Israel, which was a camera-based player tracking system used in global football. I ended up bringing that to the NBA, building a business around that. So that's my first foray into the sports data side, was bringing new technology into sports and new data capture into sports. And then from Stats went to Catapult. And when I joined Catapult, they were a small private Australian company looking to expand globally. And so I was running their US business, helped them grow the team, made a few acquisitions. And then when I left there is really at the point where I saw this explosion of really two areas. One, the number of sports tech companies. So I kind of tell people sports tech is a category unto itself. When I started my career, that wasn't really a thing yet. And so it was great to see how much it was exploding in terms of the number of companies that were emerging and the number of startups, but also dollars coming into the space, which continues to grow. So viewing sports and sports tech as a real asset class and an investable asset class. And so started investing in a number of sports tech companies because I knew that they needed some assistance in connecting the dots and really understanding the industry. And that's when I first met Rob Ryan, my partner, who's part of the Ryan family. And we stayed in touch. And then a couple of years ago, Rob was looking to do more direct investing into the sports space. And he had gotten to know my other partner, Paul Horrigan. The three of us had connected with each other independently. And we started talking about what that could look like, whether we get some other LPs, whether we create a dedicated fund. And just about almost 4 years ago now, we made a pitch to the family. And in the end, they said, let's do this ourselves. Let's be the sole LPs and let's build out a business. And that's what Ryan Sports Ventures became.
I want to double down on what you said, that sports tech was hardly a category when you first got started.
Yeah.
It feels like even today, it still feels very, very early. And it feels like so much of what goes on in sports is pretty archaic.
Yeah.
Where do you see the most opportunity? I know a lot of things in the Ryan Sports Ventures portfolio are around fan engagement, analytics, player tracking, those types of things. Which subcategory within sports tech do you have your eye on most closely, or maybe has you most excited right now?
I'd say it's really two broad categories, and there's a common theme behind really everything we're looking at, which is the evolving next generation sports fan. And I talk about my kids a lot. I have 5 children between the ages of 13 and 22, and they're sports fans, but they engage sports dramatically different than I ever did. You're much closer than their age than I am. And we look at that and see that there's an evolution in the sports landscape around how do you talk to, engage with, and eventually monetize and commercialize that next generation of fans. And that's a challenge for sports properties, for media companies, for sports sponsors. Really, anybody who touches a sports ecosystem and landscape is trying to figure that out, including investors and technology companies. So that's a common theme behind everything we're doing. And then that tends to come out in really two big categories. One is high performance. So that's using data and technology to improve your athletes, improve how they train, improve how they perform on the field, improve how they perform off the field, all the areas of what you do to play your sport. And then the other category is just the fan engagement side. Again, they're pretty broad categories, but within fan engagement, like how do you consume content? How do you create content? We have a couple investments in the short form content side, which is much more geared towards next generation fans. So whether that be data, technology, different viewing options and experiences. Again, all of that ties back into while the Ryan Field part of the Ryan family is definitely independent of what we do on the Ryan Sports Ventures, they're taking that same viewpoint of how do we make this the best experience you can when you walk in the doors. We're trying to look at different data and technologies and experience to do the same thing, no matter what sport you're consuming. So those are kind of the overall themes. And within that, I think there's still a lot. I mean, with my background at Catapult and other companies, still a lot more to be done on the high performance side. Just using for the longest time, and I'm guilty of it. Trust me, I was part of companies that was guilty of just collecting stuff and collecting data. And for the longest time, that was what people were like, hey, we can collect these things. Okay. But how do you actually make sense of that? And then how do you put that into practice? And how do you either improve your performance, recover from an injury, make it a more enjoyable performance? People assume those technologies are just about how do you help the elite athletes, but it's also how do you make playing the game more fun for all athletes, even if you're not going to become a professional, for youth athletes. I mean, I think youth sports is getting a lot of attention because of the infrastructure. How do we make sure people want to play because it's fun and not just because it's going to be, I'm going to get a scholarship and all that kind of stuff? That's parents talking. Kids want to play because they like sport, and how to use technology and data and different experiences to continue to make that fun for them.
It's very interesting on the training side, on the injury prevention side, return to play. There are some groups and some companies that are using data very, very well in that department. A lot are not yet.
Yeah.
There was a whole book written earlier this year called Ballistic about really Marcus Elliott at P3. And I know you know Marcus, and you've had a relationship.
I read the great book too. Henry Abbott's great. That was a wonderful book.
I thought it was such a great book, and it hit on a lot of these things I've written about in Substacks and things in the past, how there are so many businesses that spent years collecting data to understand how to better optimize, in a lot of cases, physical processes within their company. And that could be a well in an oil field or a conveyor belt in a gigantic distribution center for better inventory management. They didn't know what to do with that data. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing with predictive analytics and the big data revolution was actually you can harness that data and it can tell you something about your business. You can do predictive maintenance. You can fix things and tighten screws before the machine explodes. Yeah. And it's just so funny to me that has lagged so much to take those same principles and apply them to the most important thing, being the human body. But it's also, at the same time, it's very exciting because there's obviously such a precedent for it on how to leverage that data and keep people healthy and make them better athletes. So an example of an emerging league, and you were talking about the fan engagement and the importance of next gen fan sport interaction, basically. I know that you guys just invested in the Snow League, and I want to hear your rationale there. I spoke to Ben Gardner on episode 10 of season 2 here from Will Ventures. They're a fellow investor in the Snow League. And he really had an interesting breakdown where he said one very key factor of investing in a new league like the Snow League, beyond Sean White and the relationships that came with him being at the helm, the fact that something like crazy snowboard jumps show up so well on a screen that's this big, on short form video, on social media, like it makes for engaging content that Gen Z and younger fans can actually eat up versus thinking just about what is on the big screen on the TV.
No, that's right. And Snow League's a great example of that. And we invested in them very early on alongside Will Ventures. And so we've been a part of each of their investment rounds. They've only held one event. It was in Aspen this past March, and I was there. I felt very out of place and probably the oldest I've ever felt in Aspen. But it was great to see it in action and see the engagement and see the excitement. They make it about the athletes. They make it for the athletes, but they also make the stories about the athletes. Think about what people like about the Olympics is the stories behind them. Not only the athletic performances, that those are always amazing, but when you watch the broadcast, they'll do those deep dives where they tell someone's backstory and they tell you all about how they got there and their struggle. But then they disappear for 4 years, and they do events that maybe people in Europe and other people pay attention to, but we don't here. And snowboarding is it's always been one of the most popular Winter Olympics events. And it's a very global sport. They use a bunch of stats to say there are more skiers and snowboarders globally than there are golfers. And yet there's not a lot other than the Olympics. There haven't been a lot of ways for them to engage in that sport at the highest level. And so we really think Snow League fills that gap, and they're just getting started. They have a lot of plans going forward. They have this first season. I know their second event is coming up in China, and they'll have a couple others leading into the Olympics next year. And then they're planning a second season coming out of that. So we're very excited about what they're building. They're engagement with sponsors. I mean, the sponsors they have involved have been ecstatic with the engagement they get, the stories they can tell. It's a very young audience, as you can imagine. Again, they're not trying to appeal to me. They're trying to appeal to much younger people to engage in different ways. So Snow League has been great, and as you said, it helps to have Shaun White's star power behind it. But more importantly, they have amazing operators that are behind it. For us, it's great to have Shaun and his star power. That's certainly a big benefit to investing, but the team they have behind it are really solid in terms of being able to pull these events off and do it very profitably and grow the company well. So they've been on a great trajectory, and we expect that to continue.
So I find it kind of interesting that a family office like the Ryan family has such a stated interest in these earlier stage sports tech investments. Partially, I mean, you broke it down. You have the early stage sports tech stuff, sports properties, and sports media. And it certainly makes sense. And there's a lot of, intra portfolio collaboration possibilities. But it's still kind of interesting because a family with resources of that scale, demonstrated by the ability to write a check for $400 something million in the case of the Northwestern donation, generally those types of people would lean more towards private equity style deals or things on the kind of growth equity side, rather than wanting to play the venture game at all. What is kind of maybe it's in the family's kind of entrepreneurial DNA, I don't know. What is the real reason for why they want to go early and take chances on these really immature companies that are obviously high upside? Yeah. The reason anyone plays the venture game, but just feels a little bit unique for a family office.
A lot of it was because of their interest in sport in general, but also not wanting to be passive investors. Like they could very easily be LPs in a bunch of funds, and I'm sure that'll get them good returns. And I know they are in some non-sports funds, and that does great for them. But really, it was led by my partner Rob and his goal and desire to work closer with these kind of companies. And when myself and my other partner Paul Horrigan got involved, it was really to not only say, hey, we think there's a great asset class we can invest in, but also we see the need to help these companies. I mean, the traditional venture model is you make 10 bets, you hope a couple of them work, you're on some boards, but you're just off doing the next deal. That's not who we are. We joke about it. We're not the traditional venture group. We're much more, we think like operators. Each of us have an operating experience in the past and in the sports space. And that's kind of where we look at how can we help solve problems? How can we help grow teams? How can we help these companies get to the next stage? This past year in 2025, we've been spending a lot of time with our portfolio companies because a couple of them are on that stage of getting to that next level, raising that bigger round. And they're facing a lot of the challenges that any company in the industry faces, is building out the team, making sure you can manage some of that growth, having all the infrastructure in place, having the right strategy, having the right partnerships, getting the right capital involved. So we really view ourselves as an extension of each of our portfolio companies, not because we require it and say, hey, you have to listen to us, but because the companies want that. The companies are looking for that. And so we really view this as a partnership. So it was less about, hey, we need to do early stage venture. It's more, as you look at the sports space outside of the traditional leagues that are already solid in what they do, the rest of the industry is pretty, as you pointed out, still pretty young and still pretty evolving. So most of the opportunities are going to be early stage. So it was less a stated, we want to do early stage venture, and more, where can we provide the most value? Where can we kind of create a niche for ourselves? And of course, how can we get a good financial return at the end of the day? So it was all those factors, but it was less, we need to do venture, and more, as we look across the sports landscape, that's where most of the activity is. That's where we feel like a lot of the opportunity is. And so that's where we're going to start and focus.
Tell me a little bit about sourcing for you guys. I'm sure it's a lot of warm introductions, but if you Google sports venture capital, I think the first or maybe second result is Ryan Sports Ventures. So I'm sure you get a lot of good SEO.
Oh, that's good to know. I haven't done that in a while, so glad to hear that's happening.
You guys pop up very, very quickly, but I'm sure you get a lot of inbound as a result of that, and a lot of cold inbound, really.
We do, and we try to. It's hard. We try to look at those. We have an inbound. I mean, I'll put it this way, Brent. We're a small team. It's just Rob, myself, and Paul. So we handle everything. We do it all ourselves. So we don't have a lot of administrative staff to do that type of stuff, but we do look at everything that comes through. We encourage people to reach out. The reality is it's hard to dig into something without some warm lead, without another connection. We're not lead investors. So a lot of times we're working with other investors. So again, we mentioned Will Ventures, that the Ryans are LP in their funds. Advantage, we have a very close relationship with, and we're LPs in their fund, but a lot of other investors in this space, whether they be other institutional funds, other family offices, even individuals. Like, we spend a lot of time talking to other investors because venture is a team game. Usually you're doing it with a lot of other people. You're sharing deals. You're tapping into other people's expertise. So we want to be viewed as one of the people want to go to for investment, but we also want to bring in others that complement our skill set, because we know we don't know everything. We know that we can't capture everything, and we know that everybody has their own network. So it's good to hear that we pop up in that world, but where there's a lot of good investors in the space, and we work really hard to build good relationships with them. So deal flow itself, yes, it's inbound, but a lot of it is through our networks. Paul and I being in the sports space for over 2 decades each. And then obviously Rob has some experience in that space, and then the Ryan family in general and what they can do in terms of their reach. So when we first joined this and we were pitching it to the family, one of the questions we got was, hey, will there be enough deal flow? And it kind of made me chuckle, because I said, I know that's not going to be a problem. The problem is going to be choosing the right ones and making sure we can support them in the right way. So it's a combination of warm leads and inbounds, but the reality is most of what we react to are referrals from other people.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. So we were talking before about some of the fan engagement technology, which you think of selling to teams or institutions that use that type of software in most cases. However, there are a couple of companies in your portfolio, including Future and Ladder, that stand out as consumer plays. There's obviously a mega trend of wellness overall in the consumer landscape that I think has only accelerated since COVID. But tell me what your overall view is on the consumer sports tech, fitness tech, wellness landscape, because people have varying and differing views on consumer when it comes to technology, which can be kind of strange how much people go to bat on anti-consumer in particular. But I want to hear your take there.
I would say it's not a primary focus of ours. We're certainly open to making some bets in companies we feel are really figuring that space out, or helping companies then transition into that space. The best example of that is our company Player Maker, which started as a wearable around the soccer cleat that is working with elite teams, but more and more their business is direct to consumer. So people who can buy it online, do their own individual personal training, and that's really where their business is growing. So being able to bridge both those gaps where possible. But Ladder is one of our more recent investments, and we got brought into that through the Advantage Fund, who led that investment and brought us into it. And really, it was unique because they have figured out a way to create, and I'm a user of the product as well, so it's helpful that it's something that you can use and you can experience yourself. But it really makes it much more engaging, and they've done an amazing job of building a platform that's easy to use, flexible for wherever you are in your journey, isn't too kind of preachy on what you could do. You have a lot of different options where you could do it, and then layer on things like they recently layered on a nutrition part of it. So not just doing the workout side, but then bridging that into nutrition and other things that they feel like they can bolt on going forward. And to give them a little plug, they were just named one of the 3 finalists for Apple's App of the Year. And when I first read that, I'm like, did they mean like sports app of the year? No, all apps. They're one of the top 3, which is pretty amazing. So consumer, I would say, isn't been a direct focus of ours, but certainly where there's areas that really tap into how people are either, again, engaging in sports, participating in things. Again, the fitness side is a completely different thing, but the community they built around that within the Ladder app is pretty impressive. So that's what really got us into it. But we think there's a lot more there to go. And again, it's hard because there's so many different options out there. How do you make sure you're speaking to people the way that and meet them where they are and grow that community? So that's really been what Ladder, I think, has done differently.
I now want to shift gears and talk a little bit about media and sports media, sure. Another lane that you guys play in.
Yeah.
Where is the future of sports media? Because to me, I think building SportsCenter 2.0, for example, or an NFL Network type program 2.0 does not feel very investable to me, partially because going for such a broad audience and trying to get everyone under one roof, honestly, I think is kind of diluting the content in a lot of ways. And there are so many niche super fan communities seemingly for everything. That is personally where I would rather play, get involved. Yep. I know you guys have done deals like Men in Blazers and just women's sports that are already more category specific. How do you look at it? Obviously, I'm sitting here doing this podcast, doing a lot of primary research, talking to experts like you, sure, trying to serve people who work in the sports economy and build out what is going to be more of an expert media network within sports, picking a narrow and deep audience rather than trying to appeal to everyone and dumb things down. But I want to get your take there.
Yeah, to us, it's about personalization and community. So making it personalized to what you're interested in. It's an overstated thing, but the future of all content is not passive. It's active. It's choosing what you want to see. And you see broader platforms like TikTok and others that are learning what you want to see and feeding you things. But within sport, being able to highlight what are the things that you're passionate about or interested about, and how do you connect with those? And then the community side is those things you're passionate about. How do you then share that with others within your community? And I think our two investments in the media content space played that out. I mean, we had pretty broad theses around women's sports. We think there's still a ton of potential there in terms of building out the rest of the infrastructure for women's sports, building out, the data capture with women's sports. But it really started with, you need to have a platform. I mean, just women's sports' thesis is the traditional platforms are treating women's sports like just an added thing to what they normally do. So it's a small little niche, as opposed to, if you're interested in women's sports, that's what you want to hear about, not like a little small version over here to the side. And in order to do it, you need to be authentic. You can't just say, hey, we're going to give it a little airtime here and then go back to what we were doing before. It needs to be authentic. So the platform that they built at Just Women's Sports is authentic to that space. And we think that's really important. Men in Blazers is very similar. Roger Bennett is a very unique individual, has built an amazing following in the community. My partner, Paul, has known him for a number of years. They worked together back when Paul was at Coca-Cola and he was a sponsor of what he did. And so they'd never raised outside capital. And so we were part of their first raise of capital. And that was led by much bigger groups, but they had us involved because they knew that we could help them in figuring out how to connect with this community, how to build off of this momentum of global football within the United States heading into the World Cup in 2026. So how they could build around that community. And Roger, not only is he amazing as an individual, if you watch what he does, I mean, he is, when you see what he does with his interviews, that's him. That's not a personality. He's like that 24/7, just enthusiastic, really deep into the sport, and really can connect with just about anybody. He creates these events where he has really passionate people that come and follow him. So that created content, that unique content that builds off of that passion and that community, I think is pretty unique as well. So Brent, 100% agree with you. It's not about, we're going to take all kinds of data and just kind of make it a place for you to come and get whatever you want. It's really, we want to personalize it to what are your interests, what are your passions, and who is your community, and how can we connect you to that? And what's the best vehicle to do that? And a lot of it is going to be digital because that's what the world is. But each of those digital things then have an in-person platform. I know the NWSL Championships is this weekend, and Just Women's Sports is going to host some events around that. So there's going to be in-person community and in-person gatherings that are connected to what you do on the digital side. So on the media side, we're pretty selective there. Those are the only two investments we made up to this point. Like I said, most of our volumes want to be sports tech side. On the media and on the properties, we'll be a little bit more selective. But where we are, it's going to connect into a broader theme of what we see within the sports landscape, and women's sports and the importance of global soccer and football within the United States are two big themes of ours.
And so on that properties front, you mentioned AFC Bournemouth.
Yep.
What are some things that, as you look at European soccer as a landscape, what are some things that American sports can take from them from an organizational or structural perspective? It's obviously a very different layout over there.
It is. And I mean, obviously people go to the relegation promotion, which is a different dynamic. I mean,
Right.
One of the things that we liked about Bournemouth is we joined alongside Bill Foley, who owns the Vegas Golden Knights. He bought Bournemouth about 3 seasons ago, and we invested about 9 months after he made the initial investment, or about 6 months. And really it was about him and the culture that we knew he could build and the success that he could bring. But also the fact that he bought Bournemouth for, I think it was 6 months after Chelsea, and he paid about 10% what they paid for Chelsea. And they play in the same league. So obviously they're different brands. They have different revenue profiles, but they play in the same league. They get the same media revenue. And the other thing about the global soccer is the player development. I think that's one of the things that U.S. sports, they're always focused on, but because of the structure of what the league is, you're thinking about players in a 2-3 year horizon. That maybe that's what your contract is. Sometimes in sports like the NFL, it could be even shorter. Mm-hmm. I think in global soccer, they're looking at players when they're much younger. So we're part of Black Knight Football, which is a multi-club ownership of which Bournemouth is the key property. But they're building an ability to create different areas so that players can develop along the way. So identify a player early in his career, have him go to one club to get that experience, and then as he develops, move to the other club. So I think that long-term player development is pretty unique within global football. Whereas in the U.S. side, they're looking at who am I going to draft right out of college, sign him for a couple of years, and then maybe I move on. So they have a much shorter viewpoint. And part of that is because of how the sports are structured. But it's unique to see how global football programs look at athletes from, an early age. How do you develop them? How do you identify them? How do you make sure that they're moving along in your academy program and then get experience on the field? Because you could have a great academy player. How do you don't want to just throw him into the mix of the Premier League alongside Man City and Arsenal and Liverpool? How do you get him experience other areas and then move them up? And Bournemouth's done a great job of that. They have a player right now on their team that they brought from Laurent, which is their French club, and he's done really well this year. And so they want to do more things like that, where they develop people at some of their other clubs and then bring them up to Bournemouth. And unfortunately, we're one of those clubs where success of our players means we'll end up selling them to the really big clubs. So it's one of those. It's kind of heartbreaking as not only an owner, as a fan, because last year we sold 3 of our top players for really good prices, which is great from a business standpoint. But you hate to see them leave. But luckily, we've been able to replace them with the next generation of younger players, and that's kind of the cycle of the sport.
Well, that development tees me up for my next question, which
Sure.
I know Youth Inc. is another company in the Ryan Sports Ventures portfolio. Talk about that investment and talk more about how you see the youth sports landscape evolving in the U.S. and maybe how it compares and contrasts to youth sports in Europe.
You think is a unique one. I mean, it was one of our earlier bets. My partner Paul met Ryan Bass, who had this concept to build You Think. So it was kind of pre-revenue, pre-concept. He was at Fanatics working on a youth sports platform, and Fanatics basically told him, "Hey, we're not in a position to support this," but they very much encouraged him to go off on his own and build it, and they would support it in that way. And so he saw an opportunity to build a youth sports commerce platform. But then he met Greg Olson and what he was building on the media side. And Greg had this passion around how we can improve education around youth sports. So again, as a professional athlete, as a commentator around professional sports, he coached his youth players, and he kind of said, "Hey, we're doing this wrong. We need to be able to provide them more support. They're not professionals. We still need them to have fun, but we need to create the right support." So he started to build this media platform where because of his access, he could get to different people and help to inform people. And so the theory was, let's take that media platform, which is really authentic and tie to people within the space, and then connect to that a commerce platform. So those same people, let's give them a really easy way to order merchandise and other things around supporting your program, which up until now is a very mom and pop type of industry on the youth sports side. So that was the thesis behind it. But we were really betting on Ryan and who he is and his expertise as an operator, and then what Greg and his media team brought to the table. And I think to your question about broader youth sports, we kind of talked about it earlier. I think it's in a lot of ways, it's great that there's more access, there's more availability, there's more technology makes it better. So technology makes it easier to view games, to keep track of games. I think the flip side of that is we don't want to professionalize these things for kids. They're still kids, right? I mean, I was fortunate to coach a lot of my kids growing up. I'm still coaching my daughter's 8th grade basketball team. And it's great to connect with them. And sometimes you realize, as much as you want to run the right plays, they're kids and they want to have fun playing sports. So I think there's a balance between the two. Sometimes I worry we go too much to the extreme of the professionalization of it. But I know that's something that Greg Olson talks about a lot, is there's a lot of ways you can support kids, make sure that they're improving their skills, but make it fun and make it something, because whether we like it or not, kids have a lot of other options for their time. And most of those options are not positive on screens and digital. And you need to balance it out with being more physical and active. And I think sports and activities are a great way to do that. So I think there's a lot more that could be done in the youth sports side. I would just caution us all to make sure that we remember that these are kids and not professionals yet.
So last question here, 2 parts. As sports solidifies into an asset class and more capital flows into the category by the week, it seems.
Yep.
What is it that is causing some trepidation for you? What are you a little bit concerned about, where you see what's going on, or you see where things might be headed and you think, I don't know that that's really where we want this thing to go? And then on the flip side, what are some of the opportunities and more positive avenues that you see that just get you fired up and make you think, gosh, 5-10 years from now, the sports world is going to look totally different in these ways, and they're totally going to be for the better?
I think the things that worry me are there's so much money coming to the space that not all of that money may understand the sports landscape and understand the challenge. I mean, sports is fun. I mean, at the end of the day, sports is a fun thing to invest in, and a lot of people might jump into things without really understanding the challenges it may be. So the result of that, Brent, is valuations sometimes for these companies are still a little bit higher than they should be because there's so much money out there, and someone will give you that money. And if they're investors that aren't typically in the sports space and they view sports as just kind of a fun asset class or something to take a flyer on, sometimes that, and we're not typically lead investors, so there's not a whole lot we can do about the valuation, but we pass on a lot of things that we really like because the valuation in our minds is a little bit too high, because at the end of the day, we're investors, and the entry point and the valuation or entry point is very important as you think about your exit point, right? So I think that's the only thing that really, concerns me is like, we got to make sure that the money coming in is I'd use an overused phrase of smart money or, informed money. And I think there's still a lot of other money out there that kind of sometimes can muddy up the waters from a valuation standpoint. I think the things that get me excited are, the way that we can use technology to make what has typically been an elite experience. So in the past, things that only professional athletes or professional sports, and that could mean training and technology. It could mean even the broadcast experience. There's a lot of things where the broadcast of a professional game is so great, and then anything beyond that is pretty hard to follow. Technology is going to make that the same. You can use technology and make what looks like an elite professional broadcast for almost any event you have out there. And I think the same with technology and data. And again, those are the things we're trying to find and back, is how can we take things that typically were just that tip of the pyramid and bring it to the rest of the pyramid, and again, improve the way you engage with sports, improve the way that you play your sport. And I think technology and data is a way to do that and make it scalable. Now, it's not easy. So it's easy to say that, much harder to pick the right companies and execute on that. But that's the part that gets me excited, is how can we create what is an elite experience for anybody who's engaging, playing, watching, following all levels of sports.
I love that answer. It fires me up.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Let's keep in touch. Thank you.